Chapter 5 of Hindu Tales or The Adventures of 10 Princes by Danton, translated by P.W. Jacob. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Siddharth. Further Adventures of Rajavahana. Thus the princess, listening with delight and astonishment to the sweet and eloquent words of her husband, and he never tired of contemplating her beauty and enjoying her caresses, lived for some time in the greatest happiness, without care or anxiety for the future. One night, when both were sleeping, the prince had a remarkable dream. He seemed to see an old swan, whose legs were tied together with lotus fibre, approach the bedside. At that moment he woke with the feeling of pressure on his feet, and found himself bound with a slender silver chain, bright as the rays of the moon. The princess awoke at the same time, seeing her husband thus fettered, screamed out loudly in her fright. The attendants in the adjoining apartments, hearing the scream, thought something dreadful must have happened. They rushed into the room, added their cries to hers, and forgetting all their former precautions, left the doors open so that the guards outside, hearing the clamour, entered and saw the prince. When about to seize him, they were awed by his dignity and contented themselves with giving information to the regent Chandravarma, who, on receiving it, came immediately to the place. Looking at the prince with eyes burning with the fire of anger, he began to recollect him and said, "So, this is that conceited Brahman who has been deceiving the people, making them believe that he is wonderfully clever, the friend of that fellow, the husband of that wicked Balachandrika, the cause of my brother's death. How is it possible that the princess should have fallen in love with such a paltry wretch, overlooking a man like me? She is a disgrace to her family, and shall soon see her husband impaled on a stake." Then, with his forehead disfigured by a fearful frown, he continued to abuse the prince, and having tied his hands behind him, dragged him from the room. Rajavahana, naturally brave and encouraged by belief in that former existence, the remembrance of which had so wonderfully arisen in his mind, bore all the insult with firmness, and saying to the princess, "Remember that speech of the swan, have patience for 2 months, and all will be well," submitted quietly to the imprisonment. When the ex-king and queen were informed of what had happened, they were greatly distressed on their daughter's account, and exerted themselves to save the life of their son-in-law, but the regent, in whom all authority was vested, resisted their entreaties, and only on condition of their resigning some of the few privileges which still remained on them did he consent to defer the execution till he had communicated with Darpasara and learned his pleasure on the subject. He confiscated the property of Pushpodbhava and threw him and his family into prison. And being about to march against the king of Anga, and unwilling to leave the prince behind, lest he should be liberated by the old king, he caused a wooden cage to be made, in which the prisoner was shut up and carried with the army. Treated thus like some wild beast, roughly shaken and neglected, Rajavahana would have suffered greatly had he not been protected by the magic jewel given to him in Patala, and which he had contrived to conceal in his hair. Chandravarma had some time before this asked in marriage Ambalika, the daughter of Sinhavarma, king of Anga, and, indignant at a refusal, was now marching against him to take vengeance for the insult and get possession of the princess. Advancing therefore with a large army, he prepared to besiege Champa, the capital city. Sinhavarma, being of a very impatient and impetuous disposition, would not wait for the arrival of the allies, who had been summoned to his assistance and were then on the march, but throwing open the gates, went forth to meet the enemy. A terrible battle ensued, in which both kings performed prodigies of valor. At last Sinhavarma was taken prisoner, and his army so completely defeated that the conqueror entered and took possession of the city without opposition. Chandravarma, having now the princess in his power, determined to make her his wife at once. He therefore treated her father with more consideration than he would otherwise have done, though he put him in confinement and caused it to be proclaimed throughout the city that the wedding would be celebrated with much splendor the next morning. A messenger arrived from Kailasa, bringing a letter from Darpasara, in which he had written, "O fool, should there be any pity for the violator of the harem? If the old king, my father, now in his dotage, was foolish enough to favor the criminal for the sake of his worthless daughter, you had no need of his permission, and ought not to have been influenced by him. Let that vile seducer be immediately put to death by torture, and his paramour be shut up in prison till I come." Chandravarma, who had intended to march against the allies, advancing for the assistance of his captive, on receiving these commands, gave orders to his attendants, saying, "Tomorrow morning take the vile wretch from his cage, and set him at the palace gate. Have ready also a fierce elephant suitably equipped, which I shall mount immediately after the wedding, to overtake my army in march against the enemy. And as I set out, I will make the elephant trample the life out of that criminal." Accordingly, the next morning the prince was brought by the guards to the gate of the palace, and the elephant placed near him. While he stood there, calmly awaiting death, which now seemed inevitable, he suddenly felt his feet free, and a beautiful lady appeared before him. She, humbly bowing down, said, "Let my lord pardon his servant for the injury which she has unconsciously caused. I am an Apsaras, born from the rays of the moon. One day, as I was flying through the air, wearing a white dress, a swan, mistaking me for a lotus flower, attacked me. While struggling to keep off the bird, the string of my necklace broke, and the pearls fell on the grey head of a very holy rishi, bathing in clear water of a Himalayan lake. In his anger he cursed me, saying, 'O wicked one, for this offence you are condemned to be changed into a piece of unconscious metal.' When, however, I entreated forgiveness, he was so far appeased that he modified the curse, and granted that I should still retain consciousness, and remain as a fetter on your feet for 2 months only. The change took place immediately, and I fell to the ground, turned into a silver chain. About this time, Veerashekara, a Vidyadhara, partly of human descent, had been acquainted with Darpasara. Then, performing penance on the great mountain, and thinking he might get assistance from him in a feud in which he was involved, had been made an alliance with him, and engaged to marry his sister, the Princess Avanti Sundari. Being desirous of visiting his intended bride, he flew through air to Avanti. On his way, he saw the silver fetter, descended to the ground, picked it up, and continued his flight. Having made himself invisible, he entered without difficulty the apartment of the princess, and was astonished and enraged on finding her lying in your arms. His first impulse was to kill you, but some irresistible influence restrained him, so that he contented himself with putting the silver fetter on your feet, and departed without otherwise disturbing you. You have, in consequence, suffered all this misery. Now my transformation is ended, and you are so far free. Tell me what I can do for you in atonement for the suffering which I have caused." The prince, not thinking himself, said only, "Go at once to her who is dearer to me than life, and comfort her with the news of me." At that moment a great clamour was heard, and some persons rushing from the interior of the palace called out loudly, "Help! Help! Chandravarma is murdered, killed by an assassin who stabbed him as he was about to take the hand of the princess, and that the man is now moving about the palace, cutting down all who attempt to seize him." Rajavahana, when he heard this, without losing a moment, and before the guards had perceived his feet to be unfettered, with a sudden spring leapt on the elephant intended for his destruction, and having thrust off the driver, urged the beast at a rapid pace, pushing aside the crowd right and left as he went. Having got into the courtyard, he shouted with a loud voice, "Who is the brave man that has done this great deed, hardly to be accomplished by a mere mortal? Let him come forth and join me. We two united are a match. We two united are a match for a whole army. The slayer of Chandravarma, hearing this, came out of the palace and quickly mounting the elephant, who held down his trunk to receive him, placed himself behind the prince. Great was their mutual astonishment and joy when they recognized each other, the prince exclaiming, "Is it possible? Is it really you, my dear friend Apaharavarma, who have done this deed? Who have done this deed?" And other saying, "Do I indeed see my lord Rajavahana?" Having thus recognized and embraced each other, they turned the elephant round, and passing through the crowd and the courtyard, went into the main street, and now thronged by soldiers. Through these they forced their way, employing with good effects the weapons placed on the elephant for the use of Chandravarma. Before, however, they had gone far, they heard the noise of battle at a distance and saw the soldiers in front of them scattered in all directions. Soon they saw coming towards them a very well-dressed, handsome man riding on a swift elephant. On reaching them, he made obeisance to the prince, saying, "I am sure this is my lord Rajavahana," and then turning to Apaharavarma said, "I have followed your directions exactly and hastened on the advancing allies. We have just now encountered and utterly defeated the enemy, so that there is no fear of any further assistance." Then Apaharavarma introduced the stranger to the prince, saying, "This is my dear friend Dhanamitra, well worthy of your respect and consideration, for he is as brave and clever as he is handsome. With your permission, he will liberate the king of Anga and re-establish the former authorities. Meanwhile, we will go on to a quiet place and wait there for him and the princes who have come so opportunely to our assistance." Rajavahana agreed to this. They went a little further and dismounted at a pleasant, cool bank, shaded by a large banyan tree and close to the Ganges. When they had been for some time seated there, Dhanamitra returned, accompanied by Upaharavarma, Brahmati, Mitragupta, Mantragupta, Visruta, Praharavarma, king of Mithila, Kamapala, lord of Benares, and Sinhavarma, king of Anga. The prince, astonished and delighted at such an unexpected meeting, warmly embraced his young friends and very respectfully saluted as a son the elder men introduced by them. Many questions were asked on both sides. Rajavahana told them his own adventures and those of Somadatta and Pushpodbhava, and then begged his friends to relate theirs. Apaharavarma spoke first. End of chapter 5.